Hello and welcome back to Scattered Thoughts, the podcast where we talk about CPDH and other magic-related things. I'm Joe.
And I'm Bobby B. Fine.
With a little bit of a delay. So we are here back in part 2 of our threat assessment mini-series, talking about the most important thing to win yourself some more games. This week is going to be Pillar 2, which is Know Your Opponent's Deck. But before we get into all that, real quick, wanted to go over a little bit of a recap of the Sanctuary. Was it
Sanctuary 4?
Right?
Yeah.
Sanctuary 4 that happened. Obviously, Bobby wasn't playing because he can't win his own event.
I could, but I'm choosing not to.
He could, but it's bad optics, so he doesn't. So it would just be quickly going over my run, how it went, what happened, that kind of thing. Any comments before I start to go into that, Bobby?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was fun. Lots of people had fun. Lots of cool decks. It was awesome seeing Ryan, Papa Popper, take it down with Third Path Iconoclast. I mean, that deck's done well a lot, so not surprising. I know it won. I think it's the first multiple tournament winning deck at this point, because it won the third Riches to Rags, a different version, but still same commander, mostly the same cards, I think. So,
I think if you want to count, there's that one Gretchen won event by Puzzle, right?
Yeah, I mean, sure, that was a CEDH thing, but yeah.
It was like a budget. It's not exactly our format.
Yeah, close.
Yeah,
close. So you can have that argument, but yeah, it was awesome seeing Ryan win. I mean, I have some thoughts on some of the games we'll talk about later. But yeah, tell us, you took, what did you take? Malcolm Breaches or?
Yeah, it was Malcolm Breaches. I got 6th place, so not 5th.
Yeah, can't even do that right.
Can't even get it quite right. I was one placement off. My day went interesting, I would say. Definitely a lot, very, very interactive games, a lot of counter magic. And I think that the story of my games, which I ended up going 2-2, was just kind of running out of cards slowly because the games were so grindy. And that kind of made me largely reevaluate 1-for-1 cards in general, both like cantrips and removal and counter spells. I just kind of thinking about if these games are going to go a very long time and there's going to be a lot of interaction and people are going to be trading cards, you want to make sure that in that situation, either your deck wins before it gets to that or has a game plan to stay in the game if it's going that long. And so while I don't feel like I really made any egregious misplays or anything during the day, and that, I wasn't drawing terrible. I played my card advantage spells, but I didn't happen to see them. But I definitely also think that looking back, I could have had some more in the deck. I could have drawn better. I could have drawn worse, I would say. But overall, yeah. I mean, I think just I was fairly happy with my play and stuff. Just looking back at deck building a little bit more beforehand, I think is the big thing. But yeah, I mean, I can't be too upset at 6th, aside from the fact that obviously I want to start doing better than always getting 5th. It's funny because it's not even that bad a place, but realistically, it's okay, just do a little bit better and you'll be in finals every single time.
Yeah,
so.
Just get good, why don't you,
Yeah, just lock in, bro. Just dial.
Yeah.
Just lock in.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I would say, there were lots of people who needed to lock in a little more at this tournament. It's obviously easy for me to criticize from the booth, right? I'm not playing 9 the games all day, whatever. But there are lots of, questionable plays or, plays where I think people weren't really reading the room, reading the table, understanding what their deck does. They, we put our episode out after the tournament, so maybe that's on us. There's a lot of people just missing the mark and not capitalizing or being over aggressive for no good reason. I don't want to call any specific plays or anything, but if you go back and watch the VODs, you can catch some of the comments where myself, Brad, and Derek and Alcadron in the finals, we kind of point out some things and, point out where maybe players took lines that we disagreed with or were probably not the best. And more often than not, those lines got punished. So part of it, I get a tournament's a long a long day of Magic. There's lots of thinking, lots of decision making. So no one's gonna play perfect all the time. But yeah, not the cleanest games of Magic I've ever seen. I know some people are kicking themselves. There's lots of talk afterwards about people kicking themselves about, various plays or misplays or choices or whatever, what have you.
The scred, the scred of all time.
Yeah, poor David. Yeah, but there are a handful of plays throughout the day where I was like, I don't know if I agree with that, and then bad things flowed from there. So people live, people learn.
I can't remember anything too egregious from my game specifically. I mean, obviously there was little stuff, but I think the big thing is it was just like it really was a situation where a lot of the games everyone kind of ran out of cards, and I think everyone wasn't as prepared for that long game. And they just turned into really scrappy games, man, where it's like everyone's just fishing from the top of their deck. I mean, even finals was like that. I'm pretty sure Ryan won on a 0-card hand, if I remember correctly, or something.
Yeah, I don't remember, but I mean, there's a lot of interaction in that game for sure. The real thing was people were really aggressive when there were mid-rangey pods, and that's not what you want to do. This kind of plays into all of the three parts of our discussion at the end of the day, but people just didn't know, weren't able to adapt and read the table well enough, and so they're really aggressive choices made, and I don't recall a single one of the very aggressive choices ever panning out for the person who decided to make the aggressive choice. You talked about the scred in the finals, and the days like that backfired.
I mean, he was pretty. I will say that one is kind of funny. Right? He was screwed either way because he never even drew a fifth land to get Malcolm back out. But in a situation where maybe he had more mana after that, yeah, if he had just let Malcolm die and still had those resources in hand.
No, either way, the days shot him in the foot. All right, he just wasted a spell. I mean, yeah, it was not great. I don't want to pick on David, so that's what I said. I don't want to talk about specifics.
I only pointed out that one because I've chatted with him. I don't think it'll be in too harsh. I mean, at this point, he's probably just that was so silly of me,
Yeah.
If he's mad at us, my bad.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, there's a handful of things, and David was not the only one who made mistakes. I did, or plays I didn't agree with. I don't want to call them all mistakes, but yeah. So I think a lot of people can learn from it. A lot of people have told me they've gone back and watched and learned from it, which I like. I feel like I talk and commentate and critique, and then I'm glad when people like it and think it's helpful. So,
yep.
But yeah, overall, great time. Excited for, the next one. And we got a good chunk of tournaments coming up here in the next couple weeks/months. So should be exciting.
Yeah, no, it's really great. I think in general, tournaments encourage people to try to push for better decks and better play. So really hoping that with, a couple of tournaments coming up, people will, really try to lock in, get things as tight as possible, and continue to have more fun events. Because as much as, it's fun to pick on people for silly plays and stuff, at the end of the day, I think the event went great. It was the biggest one yet. People seemed to have a great time. We had a good finals, even with some of the stuff that happened. Overall, I think it was a great event,
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people said. Liam had to actually work for his money this time, our judge, so that was good. Lots of stuff came up. But overall, yeah, it was good. Moxfield stuff was kind of seamless. Yeah. Overall, a good tournament. So.
Yeah. So I think with all that, I'm good to just start moving on to the episode with a quick, review of what we talked in the last episode. Just kind of reminding that all of this is building off the basis that at this point, hopefully, you have at least a very solid understanding of what your deck does. You know what all the cards in it do. You know how it wants to win. You know what kind of other game plans it can take. You know what kind of turns it wants to play things on, what speed it wants to play the game at. You want to have that nice, thorough understanding of your deck. And now that you have that, you are going to start looking at the other people at the pod to begin kind of using both of those parts of information.
Yeah.
So, Bobby, you want to start us off?
Yeah, and I think one thing I'll say, we have this set in 3 3 steps sort of, but they all play into one another. We talked about that last time. Knowing how other people's decks work is going to shape how you make your deck, right? And some of the card decisions. So it's not really, it's easy to start with your deck, right? That's the one thing you have the most control over. So it's probably a good start there. But yeah, so I think, when this is part 2, the last part is obviously the taking everything into account, reading the table. We talked about that, I think that's one of the bigger ones. And using politics, that'll be our next episode. But those 3 things kind of make up what I envision as, the core components of threat assessment. And so knowing other people's decks is what we'll focus on today. And there's a whole bunch of ways to do it. No 2 people are going to do it the same way. I'm going to share what I do. Joe will share what he does. But first and foremost, you got to look at what other people are playing. It's real. We have a lot of resources in the PDH community, which is awesome. All the tournament deck lists are available on Moxfield in some way, shape, or form. I know Sanctuary, I have bookmarks listed on the website, on the Moxfield profile. They're in the Sanctuary Discord announcements channel. So there's ways to go look at all the deck lists from every tournament. You can go see how they did based on the bracket page from Top Deck. You can go to cpdh.guide, which links to a bunch of meta or known, highly played lists, fairly well tested lists. There's a couple of tier lists out there that have been made. Common Theory made one, Crash, Yalaron, and several others curated one. That kind of show what people think are the most competitive decks and link to those. And then when you get into like specific decks, the big thing is just reading primers that people have spent the time to make, outlining play patterns for the deck. Various people, Joe, maybe you can share your thoughts on this too. Various people go into, looking at decks with they just come up with different levels of information, different levels of know-how. I do not look at tags when I look at decks. I know what a card does when I see it. I've looked at PDH decks for years now. So I'm not there are very few decks where I need to know how or why a card works. I am probably not like everyone else. There are plenty of people who are newer to the format who don't know that and don't have the tens or hundreds of games, right? So it's important that you look at those and you look at the card tags people put on their cards, read through the primers to understand, okay, here's how this combo line works, here's how we want to play, here's kind of our model for how a game goes where we win. I think those are super helpful. There are good primers and there are bad primers, obviously. So your mileage may vary when you find them, but usually the ones on the CPDH guide list are pretty good primers. The tier list guide, I know specifically Crash and Yalaron and Co's tier list, they all have pretty thorough primers on those lists. And if you just search Moxfield, you can search by ones that have primers. So, but yeah, when you look at deck lists, Joe, what are you thinking? What are you looking at?
Yeah, so when I first go through a deck list, and I do want to say real quick, just because we're mentioning tier lists and stuff, obviously, just take everything with a grain of salt. That's just what one person thinks is strong. But in general, it gives you a really good idea of decks that other people are thinking about. And generally, if someone or a group of people are thinking about a deck, it is at least worth, you're considering.
Yeah, I hate tier lists.
Tier lists suck. They're also really fun. As long as you take them with a grain of salt. But yeah, so when I go through a deck list, the first thing I generally do is just try to take an overview of the list and just see what it looks like it's trying to do generally. Or, I'll take a quick glance over the cards, see what kind of stuff it's running, and then check out the primer if there is one. Because a lot of times, you don't even need to figure it out. The primer will just say what the deck's trying to do. You go onto Bobby's page, and you click on Malcolm Breaches, and it says, this is a control list. And you're like, great, I don't have to do any research. Or you click on the Gretchen one, and it's like, you win with Freed. Great, I don't have to figure it out, So, based on that, I will then go back and start to kind of look through the cards and reevaluate. And from there, you can draw more conclusions about what exactly the deck is trying to do and how it's trying to accomplish those things. Because there are different ways of going about it. There are different ranges from, full on aggro to kind of has an aggro game plan but uses more elements of control, something like, I don't, like Dargo Keskit, where it's like using removal and stuff but still has that Dargo beatdown going on. So I think it's just kind of like, and that's, I find the tags really useful. I know Bobby's a god, he can absorb all the cards instantly, but I really like the tags just because I can see counts of things. If I see that a deck has 15 things under removal, I know that it is at least pretty decently concerned with what the opponents are doing and trying to interact with them, things like that.
Tags are really good for that. I'll give you.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm not some god. It's just that I know I look at decks for fun in my spare time all the time. So like I'm not surprised by anything anymore. Like it's cool when I see new things pop up, but like I know what the cards do. So like I don't need to be told this is removal. I don't need to be told this is a combo piece, right? There like 2 decks. We talked about the Rocco deck last time. That one was a masterpiece. That was one where I read the primer, and I'm very glad I did because it had a lot of stuff going on. There's also a Gamekeeper list that's out there. I don't know how competitive it is or isn't, but like it's all in on making putting Battlefield Scrounger into play and like having your entire graveyard or your entire deck in your graveyard until you win the game. So like those decks where like there's funky stuff, awesome read the primers, but tags are useful. I'm really lazy. I hate tagging decks. It's just extra time. But the people who do it, it's super helpful for others. And it's usually, the primers and stuff usually have that tagging feature. And it's really helpful. I'm not going to act like it's not. I think it's important and people should look at it. And if they don't have their Mox Field set to sort by tags, I would recommend doing so more often.
Yeah, no, all of my decks are tagged, and it's not because I need to remind myself that Lightning Bolt is a removal spell in this format, but yeah, it's so that I can say, okay, I want this deck, generally, I want it to have a couple removal spells, but maybe I want it to lean more into the fast game plan, and I only want to remove the key things, and then I look over and see that I've added like 20 things to the removal pile. That's not in line with what the deck's trying to do to me, So that's why I personally use them, and I think why other people use them too. I'm not really, honestly, that's the only reason I ever did. But
yeah, and people, everyone's going to approach it differently, right? I think the big thing is knowing what you know and being very aware of what you don't know. Like go into it with an open mind, go in it trying to just absorb. If you don't know why a card's there, think about it. If you can't figure it out from there, ask the person. If it's not explained by tag or in the primer, like ask people. Know why cards are there because odds are good. If people are, taking to heart anything we said in the last one, there's a reason for every single card in a deck. So, if it doesn't seem obvious, ask. There are some weird cards that are combo cards or weird cards that have really cool functions that are maybe not as apparent. I remember when Tidal Bore was introduced as the new tech, and I guarantee you, if someone just like saw Tidal Bore in a deck, they'd be like, "Oh, that's just like some weird, not so great removal." Ish type spell. Like it's actually an insane combo piece in Tadiovo. There's you gotta go through the effort of learning how they work, understanding why it's there, and asking questions if you don't know, because that'll help you know what other people are doing, know how they're doing. When you sit down at a table with decks you haven't played against, you can have an idea maybe of there are only so many archetypes and so many combos we have in this format, so you can kind of get a generalized understanding of a lot of the big ones and then know, hey, this applies to these other decks, right? Like we talked about commanders, and for the most part commanders are doing what they do. There are variations. We talk about TPI, there can be combo, there can be mid-range, there can be control, but at the end of the day TPI is making tokens, they're burning your face, and they're countering your stuff, right? Like it's gonna have those, so you just gotta know that it's coming, and you gotta know, okay, what are the combo cards I can start to identify, so I can or what are the control cards, what are the mid-range cards, so I can start to identify which variant they're on if you can't tell by how they're playing.
Yeah, and I think a big thing too with going through these kind of like large databases is you can get a general idea of what the 99 or 98, if they're partners, index want to do in this format. Because like you may sit down across from, a deck that you have never seen before in your entire life, but a lot of commanders will kind of look like other commanders and then have kind of similar 99s. Like if you're sitting down against an Is It deck and you have no idea what it's about to do, there's like a 75% chance it's just a curiosity control pile that's getting some value from the commander. Like, that's just kind of how it goes. And so just learning those kind of general strategies can be really useful. And obviously sometimes you'll sit down against some freak show deck that destroys you. You have no idea what any of the cards were. That can happen. But I'd say most of the time, if you have a good idea and have looked through kind of all the top tier decks, all the very common decks, you'll have a good idea what people like to do in the format. What are some common things that decks like to do? What are some commonly scary cards? Oh, dude, and Bobby, I know you have something to say, but I want to bring this up because I was thinking about it when you were talking about like title board, and you see it in a list, you're like, what's that? Dude, when I was looking through Quandrix's apprentice list, there's a card that's like landfall, create a 1/1 token, and someone had it marked as a combo piece, and I could not find a single combo that could ever happen with that card. Do you know, is that a real combo with Quandrix?
I mean, I'd have to know the list, right? I have no idea off the top of my head, but
yeah, I have no idea. It really messes. I sat there for like 20 minutes staring at this list, trying to figure out what possible combo this could be making. But anyway, back to what we were saying. But Bobby, if you want to head back towards talking about learning the ways that decks win and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's best we can just kind of give a brief outline of, we're in PDH, so we have a fairly limited number of ways you can win, right? We don't have rares, mythics that enable weird other stuff. There's really like 4 categories, and you can break them down even further. There's like non-combat damage decks. These are like the decks to try to win with like pingers or straight up burn. There's the combat decks that involve, just killing people with just general combat, not necessarily just commander damage. A subset of that would be like the commander damage focused decks. You can call them Voltron, you can call them whatever.
They call him fucking Dargo is what I call him.
Dargo's the notorious one. And then there's combo decks, and combo decks have all sorts of different flavors, right? So when you see a commander, odds are good you can figure out from the commander alone where a deck falls in those, or you can get an idea and kind of start narrowing it down over the course of the game. Like when you sit down at a table, you should have a pretty good idea of what you're up against and how you expect people to win. Or you should get to the point where you feel like you can do that. It may take some time, some learning, but doing that, like that alone is going to help you decide mulligan decisions. Knowing, okay, Dargo Kedis is in the first player spot. I'm in 4th and I'm on Gretchen. I probably need to find a bounce spell or a way to, because I'm not going to be able to stop early Dargo because I'm going to be a turn behind. It is probably, depending on what else is there, who knows if they're going to prioritize me or someone else at the table. But no, taking into account all those things is good. It helps you, make decisions as early as mulliganing, and that can make or break a game. It also, it helps you know what pieces you need to look for, kind of how fast you need to play, how you need to, it leads to this other, part 3, it helps with the adaptation, right? And reading the table, because how far people are, what the combo lines are, how they're winning, if not combo, and how close they are or aren't from winning at any given time, or what they need, what they're looking for. So yeah, I think, we can talk about non-combat damage decks, burn decks first. I think examples of that are any kind of curiosity control pile. A lot of these decks are kind of hybrids, right? So I do want to point that out. Like, I play Cormella, and that's a non-combat damage deck. I win with pinger damage a lot. I think I've won with it more than I've won with comboing. And they're also the outlet for my comboing. So, there are decks like that. Loyal Apprentice does some of that too. It's also a combat deck, but it does a lot of burn. TPI can sometimes be like that. Malcolm Breaches can do it. A lot of blue-red decks are, can be non-combat damage decks. There can be red. Torwaki. It relies on the pinger game. So there's that. And those decks, they're built off pingers all the time, or just repeatable damage, burn spells. So the effective ways to interact with them are killing the pingers, damage prevention, and those are like the big ones that come to mind. You know, if
A life gain, if your deck is good at life gain, it can also destroy pingers, like, because typically they're going to be expecting, tops like 4 or 5 damage on a good turn. And so, like, if your deck consistently gains life, any deck that their primary win condition, like, it's difficult for them to win another way, is pingers. It's going to be pretty difficult for them, is something I found. Like, those
Sure.
really, really committed pinger ones life gain.
I just don't think you want incidental life gain. You don't want, like, if life gain.
Yeah,
I don't think there's a life gain
healing solve. Yeah, no, I'm not.
Like, I've seen some decks that like load up on life gain spells, and I'm not a fan of it. And I don't think like
no.
You may have some
to be
game
clear,
rates
I'm saying you go first. You go first.
I mean, like you could have some game right against that, but you don't. This goes back, or this maybe goes to building, and you don't want to hyper focus on one matchup, right? Like there's 3 people at table, you only have so many cards in your deck. If you want to just like, I'm never losing to a pinger deck, cool. You probably get and you play a billion life gain spells, you're going to lose to other stuff. Like that's just Gretchen doesn't care how much life you can have infinite life. Gretchen does not care at all in the slightest. Tatiova does not care in the slightest. Malcolm usually doesn't care. So, there's some awareness you need to have, when you're picking these spells, that you want to be prepared for the field, not just one type of deck.
Yeah, I was saying more like if you're playing against a Tatiova, right, and you're a pinger deck and you're maybe getting 2-3 damage a turn and they're hitting 1 or 2 land drops a turn, you're not going to kill them anytime in this century. So definitely don't run terrible healing spells. I more just meant if your deck has good incidental life gain or drain or something. Yeah, that can
it can help. It can help delay it and buy you that extra time you need to slow them down or stop them. So yeah, I agree with that.
Unless it's Torowaki, because that one will just explode you the second the pingers come down. It's kind of sick.
Yeah, that one just keeps going.
They just keep going.
But yeah, so that's kind of the first category deck. Then there's combat damage decks. I mean, there's a billion of these. Kadira is an example.
Gut Leader is probably the classic.
Gut Leader's an example. Wales and his ambassador blorpity blorp bloop. There's a billion of them, right? Like there's a ton of decks that want combat damage, and really the key, their weakness just depends on what kind of creatures they're on. If it's big things, then obviously targeting the big scary things is good. If they're go wide token decks, sweepers are great against them. Just kind of know what things are scary. We're not talking about Voltron here. We're talking about go wide, or just traditional combat, not necessarily go wide. But think about Gut Leader, right? The best way to deal with Gut Leader is kill Gut before they attack. If they can't make tokens, their deck isn't doing anything. They're playing a bunch of less than optimal, trinkets and stuff to sack. And it also turns off their Inspiring Leader if they don't have a Gut. So killing Gut is the key to beating Gut. And knowing that, Kadira, right? Like if you don't let them generate tokens, Kadira doesn't do anything. So it's very dependent on the type of combat they're trying to carry out, but you can figure that out by seeing what the play patterns over time. Like Kadira is all in on just making random tokens, and if it doesn't get to make its rabbit tokens, it's not very scary. Just like Gut isn't very scary if it doesn't get 6/3 skeletons.
Yep.
It's that simple. So then there's commander damage decks. I don't know if you want to touch on those.
Dude, I would love to, because I hate them. Commander damage is very interesting in our format because obviously it's only 16. And we talked about Dargo. He's 1 point of power away from 2 hitting you. But I think in general, commander damage is a very interesting thing. I don't know how many commander damage decks I really am super concerned about all the time, but it is definitely something that you have to be very ready for because, it can just take you out of the game instantly if your deck, and obviously the big thing is just removal spells. This is where single targeted removal is really going to come in handy, especially bounce spells depending on the deck. Obviously, like can go slightly wrong with Dargo in a way if they just replay him for 1 red mana, depending on what turn you bounced him and what turn they played him, yada yada. But against any kind of Voltron style deck, like I know Wilson is one that can get pretty scary just because he's got inbuilt everything. But he typically relies on, some auras popping on him or any other kind of traditional Voltron. I don't think people really play Boggles anymore. I guess single target removal doesn't work on Boggles. It's a terrible example. But yeah, basically, this one's pretty self-explanatory. There's typically going to be that central piece, and you need to deal with it in some way.
And the other thing, commander damage can sneak up on you quick. A lot of people underestimate, early hits here and there, early tags with commander damage. And all of a sudden, you could be like 12 turns later in a game. The commander is still not very big, but you took enough just stray hits here and there that, like, now every combat you're under threat of death because you took just too much stray damage from the commander. Even like a deck that isn't necessarily commander focused, right? So, like, that can be kind of normal combat decks or non-combat damage decks. Like, I've killed someone with Torwalking commander damage, so like it happens. So it's a way that people can win the game, and your life total doesn't matter. Like, you can gain as much life as you want. I'm still killing you with commander damage if you let it happen. So
I don't think I've ever killed anyone with Breach's commander damage, but I know for a fact I've gotten close enough that people started to having to like block with like mana dorks and stuff that they really didn't want to, because it does eventually, just like if the game is really grinding out, 16 isn't that high a number if your commander has a random 4 power. Like, I know that in a lot of really grindy games, Abdel can kind of start to get annoying. If the game is just going to this point where Abdel's swinging at people, because he's 4 clean hits and you're out. And so it just kind of is just like, it's just something extra to add in that you just really need to be aware of. Like Bobby said, saying, okay, no blocks twice in a row doesn't seem scary. But I saw a very specific game where an Abdel got Vines of Vastwooded by an opponent so that someone would die to commander damage with 8 Abdel damage. So just,
stuff happens.
You do have to be careful.
Yeah. That's why you track it. It's a big deal. And the decks that are focused on it are obviously way more focused on the decks that aren't. But there's plenty of them. Crackling Drake, Dargo, Bird Horse, Essior Keleth. There's a chunk of them. There's some, some that people are working on, some that you can figure it out, right? It's usually pretty easy to tell something's going to be suited up and big and scary. So.
Yep. If their commander has inbuilt protection or a natural way to grow or is naturally giant, pretty good indication that, like Bobby said, in the mulligan, if you are playing a deck that is typically targeted, a lot of times Simic decks. People love to attack the Simic deck because once they get out of hand, these combat-focused decks can really struggle to stop them. So you need to think, okay, I know for a fact this is my opponent's game plan, and it is very likely that game plan is going to impact me first. Can this hand deal with it? Can my deck deal with it? That kind of thought is exactly what we're trying to get you to start thinking about when you're brewing and when you're entering a game. And so I think after this, unless you had more to touch on that, we were going to start going into some of the more popular combo lines and just briefly touching on them and saying, like, hey, these are the combo lines that exist and you will often see in our format, and here are some times that are good to interact. Here are some indicators that someone might be running it, or, what kind of decks like to run these kind of combo, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of different combos. We'll touch on some of the bigger ones. There's more and more obscure ones you can get into. We could sit here and talk forever, right? Like, this is where, it pays off just to do your own digging, do your research. But generally speaking, we'll talk about 6 or 7 of like the main kind of combo lines that are out there, when to stop them, how they're trying to win, and go from there. First one to talk about is Ashnod's Altar. This one's sort of uncommon, so maybe shouldn't be the one to start with, but the general...
But it starts with 2 A's, so alphabetically.
Yeah. So generally, what it's trying to do is use Ashnod's Altar, which sacks a creature. You sack a creature to make 2 colorless mana. And you can do a few things with it. You can either do stuff with Mirror Retriever and Workshop Assistant, looping those. You need a cost reducer and some outlet to deal damage when all those things are dying or entering the battlefield. There's tons of pinger type stuff.
Or with the infinite colorless mana, or there's like a bunch of different payoffs. It's like a 4-card combo.
Yeah, it's hard to do up 4-card combo, but it relies on the graveyard. It relies on having an outlet. sometimes, there are lines involving mana filters into like Grave Flickering, so like Feign Deaths or Undying Malice on like an Ardent Elementalist or something, or an Archaeomancer, right? And filtering mana there to get the black to keep redoing that over and over again. So all of them rely on the graveyard in some way, shape, or form. So that's a point of vulnerability. You can get it, get in there while things are in the graveyard, exile them. Good ways to do it are Fairy Macabre, Relic of Progenitus, Honored Heirloom. Return to Nature are kind of some of the most common examples I can think of off the top of my head. There's the outlet. They do need an outlet, so killing the outlet is good, whether it's a pinger or, you can kill the mana filter, and if they don't have a way to use infinite colorless mana, which in CPDH is hard to do, because you
with
really
good
need
cards at
that.
least.
I mean, just in general, I think, but
Yeah.
But yeah, so like there's a bunch of different vulnerabilities there. So yeah, there's a whole handful of ways, and then obviously, countering the important pieces, destroying the Ashnod's Altar, depending on timing on all this stuff, it's all critical. So knowing how, walk through those loops, see how they play out, but there's plenty of different opportunities to respond in best times. And one of the big things too, at a table, if someone's comboing off and you don't know what's going to happen, talk to the table. The person coming off might not want to tell you the best ways to, interact with them, but odds are good your other two opponents will if they're still alive, because they do not want to die. So talk with them, figure out the best way to interact. Be as open or not open as you want, but you can team up in ways, if someone knows how to do it and everyone can get on the same page, and you guys can kind of work together to use removal to stop it if need be. And that applies to all the combos, right? So, second category of combos.
Or I was just going to say, I think Ashnod's is also a great example of looking for just kind of like stopgaps in combos. Like, there's a lot of combos that there's one piece that is very important, and knowing to identify those pieces and say, like, Ashnod's Altar is just a perfect example where the card isn't really for value in our format that much. If someone drops down an Ashnod's Altar, it is very likely in the deck for a combo.
Yeah.
So and there's kind of like keeping an eye out.
It doesn't have redundancy like other pieces. Like, we'll talk about some of these other combos that have just tons of redundancy. Ashnod's Altar doesn't have that. Depending on the combo, sometimes Thermopod is a second outlet or second redundant piece
Copy
there. Yeah. But that's not common, right? Like, a lot of these need exactly Ashnod's Altar, and Ashnod's Altar isn't easy to tutor up. So yeah, if you can stop an Ashnod's Altar, that's pretty good. But yeah,
it's maybe not the best combo to start off with, because it's iffy how great it is because of that redundancy, but it's out there, and it's a great way to kind of show that example of like, keep an eye out for that kind of thing, because sometimes there are these really specific combos that just like they really need their one piece, and if that piece isn't there, then how are they going to combo? Some decks like completely rely on it as far as getting their combo off, So
yeah, and then we have the next one. This one's very common, I would argue. Freed from the Real decks. Mm-hmm. So you can talk about that.
Yeah, so Freed from the Real is pretty simple. It's going to be or at least as far as the ones I know, a permanent that can tap for more mana than it takes to untap it. So a good example would be you have a land that taps for 2 mana and a creature that can untap that land, and then you put Freed from the Real on it. It only costs 1 mana to untap it. It generates 2. So you infinitely untap the creature and then tap the land for mana, untap the land, and then untap the creature, infinite mana, and then the most common outlet is just usually an outlet in your command zone, like Gretchen for that infinite mana. There is some cool ones out there with guys that can untap lands and High Tide. A lot of mono blue, or I know we're running it in the Disciple list, can use that kind of thing. This one is a very common, I don't know, I would say it's common, but mostly because Gretchen and Weavers use it, which are 2 very strong decks. So there's not really that many decks that put it in it, but you have to be ready for it because a lot of very strong decks will try to use this combo. Because the pieces involved in it are very good. They're generally things that will make you extra mana, and things that will combo very easily, but there are some downsides to this too. I think the biggest one by far is that if it is a creature that has to tap, it has to, be in play for a turn, or you have to give it haste. And that creates a very clear window of like, okay, I know for a fact that this guy can go to his turn and combo because he has this guy down. And so you really need to think about that. It doesn't mean that every single time you see one of these land untappers, you have to kill it, but it's just something that you need to be prepared for, is that you have to think about the fact that this creature's in play and this is a concern to you. Freed from the Real is also great because while there is nothing as good as Freed from the Real, there are multiple kinds of this effect. Some others that come to mind are the Galvanic Alchemist, which is a 3-mana version, and it's a Soul Bond one, which is annoying to deal with because it's Soul Bond, and it doesn't directly target it. It's weird, but what's the there's
Vigian Graph Mage, which does stuff with
Yeah,
plus
that's
1 counter guys. There's Immobilizing Ink. There's Singing Battle Strike. There's probably more I'm blanking on at the moment, but there's a chunk of them.
Yeah, and they all do a similar thing where it says pay an amount of mana, untap this creature, and that creature will somehow generate more mana than it is tapping. It is costing to untap. So you net infinite mana.
Yeah. So best way to stop it are killing the creatures, obviously, not letting them untap with it. They're being aware of the ways they can get haste. And then they also need an outlet. So, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your opinion on the decks, usually that outlet's in the command zone, so it's kind of hard to stop that a lot of the time. It's just going to be there. Stopping the combo piece from entering the battlefield ever is good. Dealing with the permanent that generates the multiple mana, whether it's the land or the artifact or the untapper or whatever, right? Like, it has a lot of interaction points. So doesn't rely on graveyard, so graveyard doesn't do anything against it really, but plenty of ways to interact.
Yeah, I think creature removal is going to be the biggest one, and counterspells, obviously. We're not going to go through and mention it every single time, but counterspelling a combo piece is debatably the most clean way of just getting it out of play. Never even has the chance to hit the board and have any protection shenanigans happen to it. But yeah, just, as far as general things go, the fact that it's a creature and has to sit around for turn is going to be, a very abusable vulnerability. So just, kind of try to gauge. Sometimes, depending on the player, you can get kind of a feel based on how they're playing and how aggressively they're trying to get untappers down and stuff. You can think like, okay, clearly he's trying to set up for something, or, anything like that. Just trying to catch a little bit of a feel, see what people are kind of playing towards. But yeah, I think after that, we're going to look at Ghostly Flicker, which is probably the most common in the format, I would say, just because it's the most universal. It's the easiest to splash in because basically any blue deck can run it. There's a trillion variations. Bobby, if you want to go into a little more about Ghostly Flicker.
Yeah, so just Ghostly Flicker plus any recursion wizard and anything that can generate enough mana to recast said Ghostly Flicker is going to get you infinite mana. If it's mana positive, I guess. So usually, Archaeomancer Peregrine Drake is like the easiest to think of. There's a billion variations on it. You can do High Tide stuff. You can do Cloud of Fairy stuff. You can do,
Mystic Sanctuary stuff.
That's kind of High Tide stuff too. So there's a bunch of different variations on it. The big thing is, it's a graveyard-based combo, so it's always super vulnerable to graveyard hate. Once that Ghostly Flicker's in the yard, that's the perfect time to snipe it. We already talked about different graveyard hate beasts you can run. Best way to stop it really leaves them hampered. Counterspells, obviously, goes without saying. They also usually need both of the creatures they're targeting to stay alive to continue the combo. So a well-timed piece of removal in response to the Ghostly Flicker can mess things up. Whether it's hitting the Recursion Wizard or the Drake, or the, mana. It just depends, right? But oftentimes there's a way to stop it with removal. And then at the end of the day, all of that just generates infinite mana and infinite ETBs. So they still have an outlet. They could have Sage's Reminiscence, they could have pingers, they could have capsizes, all sorts of things. It's not hard to find an outlet, but they do need to have one. Sometimes these are in the command zone, sometimes they're not. So varies on the deck. Lots of decks just kind of shoehorn Ghostly Flicker combo in because it's not super compact, but it's compact enough and it has enough value that it's just like decent.
Yeah, the Archaeomancers are like decent on their own. Not every deck is in love with having them, but very few decks are like mad about them. This is a funny example, though, where depending on the situation, a counterspell actually can be less than optimal. With decks that are super recursion heavy, like Tadiova is the best example that comes to my head. Sometimes that deck will literally just, you'll be like, okay, Ghostly Flicker. Okay, counter the Ghostly Flicker. They're like, okay, sure. And then they just play Mystic Sanctuary and get it back. So depending on the deck, this one can actually be one where creature removal on the flicker targets or graveyard hate especially is huge for this one. I think more than anything else, running a Relic of Progenitus can just make it insanely difficult for these decks to combo. And if they do go for the classic, end step, bounce, or remove your Relic Progenitus, it's the most obvious tell of all time that they want to untap and win, which can help the table kind of prepare for what's about to happen and plan around it accordingly. So that is just something to keep in mind, that based on the deck you're playing against and how easy it is for them to get cards back from their graveyard, that sometimes counterspelling the Ghostly Flicker can be a little bit too late. Sometimes you need to stop the Peregrine Drake or stop the Archaeomancer before it can even hit the battlefield. Because once it hits the battlefield, it can be a lot harder to deal with.
Yeah. And I think one related one I want to touch on, just because we've kind of talked about Tadiova, and it's very similar to like Freed and Ghostly Flicker in a way, is Tidal Bore. It's unique to Tadiova. I'm sure there's ways to do combo stuff in other lists, but it's even more convoluted. But Tidal Bore combos with Tadiova, Mystic Sanctuary, and a creature that taps to put a land into play. Walking Atlas, Llanowar Scout, Scaled Herbalist. There's a handful. Sakura Tribe Scout. What you do is you can return the Mystic Sanctuary in your... so you have to have Sanctuary either in play in your hand. If it's in your hand, you need to have your guy that puts a land into play untapped and not summoning sick. So it has the same vulnerability as Freed does there. But you tap to put Mystic Sanctuary into play. You return whatever. Your guy's tapped. You can Tidal Bore as a cost, casting it for its alternate cost of returning an island, specifically Mystic Sanctuary, back to your hand to untap the guy that puts a land into play. And with Tadiova, you will then tap, put the Mystic Sanctuary into play, target Tidal Bore, put it on top, draw it from Tadiova, float a blue, repeat that indefinitely. You have infinite blue mana.
And infinite life.
And infinite life. So then you have to find a way to spend that infinite mana, right? So that can sometimes be the tricky part, but it's not the hardest thing to do in Tadiova because you just draw cards a billion different ways. But yeah, it has a lot. It's really hard to interact with and stop because there's so many, returning Mystic Sanctuary as part of the cost of Tidal Bore. You can tap the thing at instant speed to put a land into play. It's one of the ones that's really hard to interact with. So one of the best ways to stop it is to not let the land guy ever have a turn where it gets untap and not be summoning sick. Sometimes countering the Tidal Bore doesn't even do the trick because, you can just return it with Mystic Sanctuary. There's just so many ways to return it and do things with Mystic Sanctuary. So Graveyard Hate is, if you can hit the Graveyard Hate timely with the Tidal Bore in yard, you can stop it sometimes. But this one is really hard to stop once it kind of gets going because it's really... Tadiova was just built in a way that really capitalizes on this. So, but yeah, stopping the guys that had to put lands into play is the key, I think, to stopping that combo. But again, unique to Tadiova, so no need to dwell on this one. But same thing, vulnerable to Graveyard Hate, vulnerable to Creature Hate, and counter spells. You just got to figure out the best time to do it if you can. So,
yeah, the big thing is just remembering that as soon as that land untapper untaps. From that moment on, technically, Tadiova has an instant speedway to generate infinite mana that takes 0 mana to start. So just be very wary of those guys. Very wary.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's a good one. And I think the last one we want to talk about is Malcolm-related combos. And the general gist of this is Reckless Fireweaver and company and a type changer. So I'll let Joe, you tackle it.
Yep, my favorite guy, Malcolm. Great at enabling this really specific combo where you have something that uses artifacts to deal damage, which you then turn into a pirate. Malcolm will see this damage because it's a pirate and generate more artifacts in the form of treasures. So with Reckless Fire Reaver, they're on ETB. This is the easiest one by far. You put him down, you attack with Malcolm, makes a treasure, you make him into a pirate, and then each trigger, it'll make more treasures, see the treasures, trigger, infinite, burn everyone. There's other ones like Sunshot and Penregan Strongbow that are a little weirder because they require you to either tap or sack the treasures to ping each player. So those you do have to be a little bit specific. If players are at 2 different life totals, it will technically fizzle before it burns everyone. But the general gist is that there are those 4 cards as of now. Wizards probably going to print more because they just keep printing them. That when they are turned into a pirate, Malcolm will instantly kill everyone with. So the big thing here is, although these don't require any form of haste enabling, every single one of them, as soon as an artifact ETBs or they sack an artifact or they tap the artifact, can do the combo. Same with Malcolm. He does not need to be, able to attack. It's the easiest way to trigger them, to just make the treasure and you get the extra mana. But keep in mind, they can play a Seed of the Synod or a Mana Rock or just sack something they already have sitting around to do these combos. So these ones are just very dangerous, and it's part of the reason why Malcolm is a strong deck. But the biggest thing here is just counterspells and creature removal, as always. All of these combos, all of them require 2 creatures to be in play. So if you have good removal, you stay on top of things. That's the best way to deal with them, is to, stop Malcolm from generating too much value, or the second they play an artifact pinger, alarm bells going off in your head. Those pieces are usually, unless the game is insanely grindy, too valuable to just throw down for the per turn pinger value for most Malcolm players. So if those go down, immediately the whole table should be thinking, oh, this guy's probably trying to combo. Don't let the Malcolm hit you and wait to see if they have the type changer. He probably has it. If he played the Fireweaver, he probably has it. Don't wait to see if he gets the treasure, because then he has more mana for counterspells.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Do you?
I mean, it's all context. I don't think you can blindly say that that's always right. So,
I will say, yeah. Rule of thumb, obviously everything has context. If they're slamming down spells, they have 7 cards in hand, I'd be worried. But yeah, it does all depend on
if you make
context.
them do the thing first, right? Like if you're taking the action first, you're making it easy for, like, they could try combo off in response, right? You're opening yourself up to get blown out. Whereas if you let them take the first action they need to take, you get the upper hand there, right? So that's why I don't like that.
Guess but it also depends on mana. If the Malcolm is super tight on mana and you think that 1 mana could matter a lot in a counterspell war, or if they're sitting over there on 50 treasures, it doesn't matter. The cards in hand is what matters, not the mana at that point. So I just will say that it has come up before, so at least think about it.
There's also situations where, and I saw this specifically in one game I remember, I don't remember when it was, or tournament, FNM or whatever, like, if you're at a high enough life total, if they're going for the Strongbow lines or the Sunshot lines, there's a chance one player isn't dead. And so there's a chance that may behoove you to let them combo off to kill the other people, and you get to stay alive. I just remember distinctly one game where that happened, or could have happened, and the player didn't realize that, and they fought, and instead they could have just won. Really, that's a niche, corner case scenario, but it's important to know, Penregan and Sunshot don't just outright win like Ingenious Artillerist and Reckless Fireweaver do. There's also, because they're type changers, more often than not are until end of turn, stuff like Prismatic Strands and damage prevention can go a real long way and really mess them up, because they only have so many type changers. They only have so many pingers that are for the combo. So if you can stop them from doing a bunch of damage that turn, you have maybe set them back a long way. And then you've given everyone, everyone knows, hey, this piece is in play. Let's kill it now while it's stopped for now. And that's a really good way to stop it. And Prismatic Strange is a good card, but there's a handful of cards like that have done some work against Malcolm lists. So
yeah, no, for sure. With the what is it, Penregan and Sunshot. The big thing is just that since it only makes 2 treasures, that means that if one player has a substantially higher life total, that's the situation and that player can live, because you'll kill off the other 2 players, and then you're only making 1, so it can't continue. So yeah, if you're at 30 and for some reason the game has just gone that the other two players at 10, yeah, just let them die. And as long as you can quickly deal with the Malcolm, because if it's Sunshot, they'll untap with a bunch of treasures. If it's Strongbow, they won't. But basically, yeah, just like definitely, obviously, everything has context. Something we'll keep saying over and over again. But just think about that. Just, that's something that can happen with those combo lines. Unlike, Freed or something where it's like once they have the infinite mana and Gretchen's in their command zone, that's, yeah, what are you going to do?
Yeah. So then with all this information in mind, the combo lines, how other non-combo decks win, this is when there's stuff you do in game, which is kind of what we'll talk about next episode. And there's stuff you do before you're even in games, which is building your deck and adapting your deck. So once you know how these decks all operate, you can identify, okay, which of those am I the most weak to? How do I shore that up? How do I shore that up in a way that isn't just like extremely dedicated to that? Like it's all context is everything. I can't say that enough. But, if I'm like, okay, so I'm Cormella, right? I'm a combo deck that relies on my graveyard. I am going to get hosed by graveyard pieces, graveyard hate pieces. So I want to play Artifact Hate because more often than not, those are artifacts. So I want to play Artifact Hate, but I also want to play Artifact Hate that does other things because if I'm just playing Artifact Hate, I'm not doing the best I could do. So stuff like a Braid is awesome because it doubles as creature removal. Bounce spells are awesome because you can bounce anything. Counter spells obviously stop that. They counter lots of things. So if you're Dargo, right, and you can never beat an Oubliette in your life, find ways to sack your Dargo, or if depending on the color combination you're in, find ways to blow up Oubliettes. You don't want to metagame too hard against one specific card, one specific strategy, one specific anything, right? But you do want to have answers, or you need to be aware that, hey, you could just fold to certain things. You maybe don't maybe it's not worth trying to have an answer to everything. But know how what's in your deck can interact with all these other things people are doing. And if you ever notice a glaring hole where you don't have a way to interact with something, maybe you should look at adding something to fix it. If you care about it, you may not care about it. You may, okay, I'm just not going to worry about that and have that be my bad, whatever. If it happens, it happens. That's fine, right? If that's a choice you make, but knowing that is important.
The physical pain in your voice when you said that's fine, because I know you as a player, you just you want your decks to have an answer to everything, obviously within reason. You're not playing terrible cards to do things, but you're like, if I can run a card that fixes this situation, I'm gonna run it. You're very big on that. So
I'm big on catch-alls, right? Like I want generic answers to everything. I want to have an answer to everything. I don't want to just have a card I auto lose to. It's the worst feeling in the world, because I've lost that way before. It happens sometimes and it's miserable. So. Yeah, not my style, but there are some decks that, like Dargo Ketis, they don't have a lot of ways to deal with an Oubliette once it happens. Like, it just is what it is. And they maybe shouldn't try to focus on it because it could just, mess up their deck too much. So there's some decks. It all just depends on what you're trying to do, how focused you are on what you're doing, and how detrimental, the thing you're deciding whether or not you need a metagame or prepare against matters. But just knowing that is important, though.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother discussion that we could have another day, honestly, the whole percentage points versus preparedness of how much are you willing to sack certain certain things to kind of accelerate your own game plan. That's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, as far as just making sure that this goes back to last week, now that you have all this information about things that other people's decks are going to do, ways that they're going to win, ways that they're going to try to stop you, all that stuff, bring it back to your own deck, try to get your own mindset in the right place to beat those things, try to get the cards in your deck in the right place to beat those things, and just enter a game with more knowledge. That is the ultimate goal of all of this, is to enter the game with more knowledge and more ability to kind of think ahead, know what might be, coming up against you, what might be coming up in your own deck, and just plan for it. And just have a plan.
Yeah, and it'll help shape your deck building decisions. It'll help shape mulliganing decisions. And then it helps shape in-game decisions, which will be all about what we talk about next time. So The other thing I like, and I don't want to get ahead too much on, what's going forward, or what's going to come in like the next episode, but it helps you understand when people are actually scary versus when they just are kind of scary, right? Like lots of people like to cry wolf and say, oh, this person's going to combo. They're so close to combo. And they're like 3 pieces away and they just like are trying to deflect. And this is going to be a big topic next week, but I think it's important to foreshadow it. If you don't know what other people are doing, you might just buy that and like you have fallen for it. So many people fall for that all the time. And, we talked about it with knowing your own deck. Like it's important to know and defend against it and say, hey, no, I'm actually not. Get out of here. Like I'm not even close to comboing. You're closer than I am. Right. Like it all plays into all the political and adaptation stuff we'll talk about. But that is going to be like the culmination of like these two things, knowing your deck, knowing other people's decks. It gives you so much more comfort and confidence in arguing for or against, gameplay decisions, and lets you kind of argue those points in game politically, and assess and decide how to deploy interaction accordingly.
Yep. And I think that was pretty much all we wanted to talk about today. So if we want to take it to some real quick announcements for tournaments, the Common Cause, which is OMG Chris's tournament, is coming up. It is going to be on the 27th of, what's the fourth month of January, February, March, April? Yep, 27th of April. $16 entry, same as Sanctuary, at noon Eastern Standard Time that day. So I'll make sure to put his link tree in the description. You can head over and look at that. Going to be a great tournament. OMG Chris is a great guy. I would really encourage you to come out, play, have a good time. And Bobby, if you would like to announce the next Sanctuary, I know technically we're not the first to put it out there, but
so if you listen to the PDH pod, you already know this by the time this comes out, but, Sanctuary, the 5th one is going to be on May 18th. So, about a month and a half or so out. But it'll be at 4 p.m. Eastern time, a little later. So it'll be going late into the evening, get some different people from different time zones accommodated a little bit more. $16 entry, prizes are going to be laid out. I think it's 40%, then 20 to the top 4. Depending on numbers, that might increase, right? Like it might pay out further if we get crazy numbers. So, but yeah, should be a fun time. You get to win. You get to be a token. Ryan's token is awesome, and it should be. I should be debuting it here soon, so it'll be cool. Get a chance to be a token, play some PDH, and then we have Riches to Rags coming up here the first weekend of April. That's already sold out. I think there might be 1 or 2 spots left if you're in the Philadelphia area. I know Joe and I are both going to be there. It'll be a good fun time. Paper tournament, so it's going to be at Punt City 3, which is a CDH tournament. So really looking forward to that. A good chunk of tournaments coming up, and it looks like they're going to be pretty consistent throughout the year.
Yeah, and I think me and Bobby are both going to be playing some CDH there. Good time. Should have some fun with that. Plenty of PDH, and yeah, should be a ball. I always love Rags, so. But yeah, I think that's about it. We'll wrap it up here. Definitely ran longer than I wanted to, but I guess we also had that little intro, so is what it is. So we got a little bit of a longer one today, but thank you everyone for listening. We will be back in hopefully another 2 weeks if we can keep our schedule going, for number 3, where we will talk about politicking, everyone's favorite thing once again.
Yeah.
Some real topics.
Super fun.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.